This is our rivet gun as it will come to you when it is shipped. It consists of the rivet gun itself, 2 multi-purpose wrenches, and 2 additional interchangeable nose pieces for different size rivets. This gun ships from the factory equipped with the proper nose piece to match all of our rivets that we sell. This is the trigger assembly. This is the air cylinder which contains the piston that moves up and down with the airflow. This is the air inlet where your hose from the air compressor will be connected. The air flows from the hose into the air cylinder when the trigger is squeezed. This airflow moves the piston, which in turn internally operates the moving parts of the assembly inside this cover, which are instrumental for actually installing the rivet. This is the jaw case assembly cover, containing the jaws that actually grab onto and pull the rivet mandrel, thus installing the rivet and retaining the mandrel inside of here. As you can see, there is a hole in the end of the nose piece, and this is where the rivet mandrel gets inserted. When the mandrel gets snapped off, it will usually fall into this tube, but may sometimes simply fall out of the nose piece onto the floor depending on the angle of the gun. The remainder of the rivet is what stays installed in the case. When this tube gets full, it simply unscrews from the gun to facilitate emptying into the trash. This cap does unscrew from the gun, but there is really no reason that you should ever have to remove it. Accessing this area facilitates some major repairs and houses a large, stiff spring which allows the jaw assembly to move back and forth inside this area. For your air inlet, we recommend that you purchase a quick connect fitting which screws into the air inlet. And then this tip is what connects to the female quick connect fitting on your hose coming from the air compressor. First, you will need to apply some Teflon tape on the threads before you screw the fitting into the inlet. So let's go ahead and do that. Roll the tape evenly across the threads in the same direction that the threads will turn when tightening. Make about 2 full layers. You do not want to block the airflow in any way, so make sure no tape obstructs the hole. Once you have the tape in place, then it's time to tighten the fitting into place. Once you hand tighten the fitting, use a wrench to tighten it the rest of the way. Make sure that it is tight, but do not over-tighten. So, this is your quick connect fitting properly into place. When you are ready to use the gun, you will connect the other fitting on your hose right here, and then you are ready to go. Before connecting your hose and using the gun, you'll want to add some air tool oil into the inlet. Just about 3 to 4 drops. Be sure not to overdo it. One of the main things with rivet guns is that they need to be well lubricated. That is the most important thing. Inside the cylinder, the jaw assembly, and the airline. If the inner workings are not clean and properly lubricated, it's just not going to work right, and that's all there is to it. That is the most common cause of malfunctions, with either this whole area not working properly, the piston not moving properly, and not allowing the jaws to function properly. So, put a few drops of oil in here every time you connect the hose. Or if you are leaving the gun connected as you work for several days, then each day that you use the gun. Now, if you're going to use it morning, noon, and night and installing a large amount of rivets, then I would recommend adding oil about halfway through the day. Otherwise, if the gun is malfunctioning, add some oil before moving on to the other troubleshooting steps. Once again, this is the air cylinder where the piston moves up and down. And it's that air compression that makes everything work up in this area. As you can see, there is what looks like a bolt head on the bottom cover. This bolt head turns the entire bottom cap of the air cylinder. The bolt head itself does not spin. This entire cap spins, and this bolt head is actually a cast part of the cap. You can use this multi-purpose wrench that comes with the gun. But what I can tell you is that depending on how tightly they installed the cap at the factory, this wrench may not do the trick. You may actually have to clamp the air cylinder in a vise first, and then try this wrench. Or you may need a socket with a larger handle to give you more leverage in order to work the cap loose. With this particular wrench, you might get lucky, but it's going to take some serious elbow grease. Once you loosen it, the cap should come off the rest of the way by hand. As you can see, this cap is all one piece, with a silicone O-ring located in a groove that is machined into the cap above the threads. When the cap is properly seated in place, the O-ring acts to properly seal the air cylinder. Now you can see the piston inside of the air cylinder. This is the portion that moves up and down with the airflow to make everything work. If you look closely inside, you can see the shiny lubricant around the outer edge of the piston along the cylinder wall. You can see it on my finger. That is the lubricant for the piston assembly. You don't need to do anything inside of here, as this comes pre-lubricated from the factory. Some rivet guns require that you lubricate inside here before using the gun, but this one does not. As a matter of fact, depending on how much you actually end up using the gun, I'm not so sure that you'll ever have to re-lubricate the inside of this area. However, if you ever do, you'll need to force the piston inward. So you'll need to have something that you can push against the piston to move it upward so that you can properly lubricate the inside. But for now, you are good to go and don't need to do anything inside of this area. However, down the road, if you are having problems with the rivet gun, then as part of your troubleshooting steps, you will definitely want to remove this cap and double check this area to make sure that it is properly lubricated. And always make sure that this cap is torqued back into place tightly. Underneath this fitting that is screwed into place is a small area that contains your valve assembly. When you unscrew this fitting, you will see a small spring sticking out of the cap. That spring holds a small acrylic disc in place, which is the airflow valve. So let's go ahead and take a look under the cap. This is the spring that allows the valve to move properly within the airflow. The spring holds the valve closed until you pull the trigger, which allows the airflow to unseat the disc, compressing the spring. If you look closely, you can see the disc in the reflection from the light. See it? That little clear acrylic disc is your valve. When compressed against the spring, this acrylic valve disc unseats, allowing airflow to pass from the hose through the air inlet and into the air cylinder, thus moving the piston, which in turn allows airflow and mechanical movement throughout the handle area and up into the jaw case plunger assembly that operates the jaws, allowing the jaws to do their thing, thus installing the rivet. So, you always want to make sure that this acrylic disc is properly seated in place, clean, and in good working condition. You also want to make sure that this area inside of here is clean and free of any obstructions or debris. As you can see, the disc just drops right into place, but just make sure that it is laying flat, and you can see that with the light's reflection. Then just replace the cap assembly back into place. And tighten it back into position. Once again, be careful not to over-tighten. There is also an O-ring above the threads on this cap to prevent air leakage. And that pretty much covers the bottom side of the rivet gun. There may come a time that you will want to change the nose piece for some reason. Maybe you'll want to use the gun for a different type of project that requires a smaller rivet. Remember, there are 2 other nose pieces supplied with this rivet gun for smaller size rivets. Now, depending on the position of the jaw plunger assembly inside of here, you'll always be able to get the nose piece off. However, you may experience difficulty getting the nose piece back on. So let's take a look. This is the tool for removing the nose piece. If you listen closely, you'll hear the nose piece pop out when it gets down to the last thread. That's because of the spring tension inside pressing the jaws against the nose piece. Therefore, you would be fighting against that tension when inserting the nose piece and trying to force the jaw assembly back far enough to allow the threads to grab. So what you will need to do is take a wrench and loosen the jaw case assembly cover. Let's take it all the way off first so that you can see how it removes. We'll get to the jaw and plunger assembly a bit later on. The cover is hollow and will slide easily back on. You might be saying, why don't we install the nose piece now? However, if you do, you'll run into the same problem trying to thread the cover because the jaw assembly spring tension will prevent the cover threads from gripping. So you'll want to position the cover so that it threads just enough so that you can't pull it off. Then you'll have enough space in the tip to screw the nose piece on, enough for it to grab a hold. It probably won't tighten all the way, but now you can screw the cover on further, tightening it the rest of the way with the wrench. Then you can use your nose piece tool to tighten it the rest of the way. Now let's say you're having problems with the gun. You're installing rivets, squeezing the trigger, but the rivet is not installing properly, the jaws aren't grabbing the mandrel properly, or the mandrel keeps getting stuck in the jaws, or maybe not exiting out the back into the tube. Sometimes you have to shake it a little, but even then the mandrel might remain stuck and not exit the gun, and you might have to pull the mandrel out with some pliers. Most commonly, that is because your air pressure is incorrect and not getting enough airflow to complete the cycle. The second most common cause for this is improper lubrication, and this can cause any of the moving parts to malfunction. Now, if you are positive that it is none of the above, or you just can't get the mandrel out of the jaws at all, then you are going to have to remove this cover to inspect and disassemble the jaw assembly. Now we can get a close look at the jaw assembly. Oh, and don't forget that when you reinstall this cover, you'll have to loosen the nose piece again. In this area here, you have your jaws and jaw case plunger assembly, which is basically 2 pieces with a threaded nut that holds the jaw case assembly in place and allows for proper alignment as to where the jaw case is situated. Such as, will this assembly be further back, or will it move further forward? This nut will adjust to take up the slack. If you move this forward, then you'll move the nut forward. If you want to move this back, then loosen the nut toward the handle, allowing the jaw case to move. But no matter which way you move the jaw case, you must tighten the nut up against it to secure it. Whenever you adjust the jaw case for any reason, it needs to be measured back into proper position with this tool. Let's take a closer look. As you can see, there is a notched area from this point to the other end. That is the distance you will use for aligning the jaw case. This end here will touch against this threaded area. While this notch should hook right on the end of the jaw case near the jaws. These are the jaws right here that grab the rivet. They open up, grab the rivet's mandrel, and then pull backward, which sets the rivet in place. Pulling so hard that they snap the mandrel off and it slides back into the discharge tube. So these need to be in proper position to work effectively, and right now the alignment is properly set. The notch is on the end of the jaw case and the other end is flush with the threaded area, so this is aligned perfectly at the moment. If this end was not touching the threads, and this notch was in the proper place, then you are out of alignment and the jaw case is too far forward. If this end is touching and the notch is too far away from the jaw case end, leaving a gap up in this area, then the jaw case is too far back. To make any adjustment, you will loosen the lock nut from the jaw case. The jaw case is threaded and can either move forward away from the body or backward toward the body, whichever way helps the alignment. And then tighten the lock nut up against the jaw case to hold it firmly in place, so that it doesn't move and only the jaws themselves will move. However, sometimes after many hours of operation, these areas can loosen and things can get out of alignment. So you'll periodically want to use the measuring tool and check. So now we'll loosen things up a bit and look at how we can adjust this assembly and then get it back into proper alignment just as it is right now. As you can see, there are little notches on either side of the jaw case. That's where this particular wrench fits into place. This other wrench is what fits onto the lock nut. Now, you don't have to use these particular tools. You can use your own tools just as well. Obviously, these wrenches aren't long enough to give you much leverage, so you may want to use other tools. But for now, we'll make use of these. So this wrench onto the lock nut, and this wrench into the notches on the jaw case. And then twist the wrenches in opposite directions to break them apart. As you see, they are free from one another and the jaw case spins freely on its threads. As you can see, the jaw case is moving farther away from the lock nut, allowing the lock washer some wiggle room. So I have taken the jaw case out of alignment. Now let's go back to the measuring tool. Remember the notched area? Let's place the notch where it should be on the front of the jaw case. And now you can see that this end down here is not touching. You can see the gap. So we are in fact out of alignment. We are in position up here, but you can see the gap in this area between the tool's end and the threads. So let's say that this was all tightened together and you had removed your cap to troubleshoot and see if there was anything wrong inside. Knowing that your air pressure is fine and that you are properly lubricated, you now want to inspect this entire area for not only alignment, but any debris or shavings in the jaws. So, this area does need to be serviced periodically depending on how frequently you use the gun. For now, back to the misalignment. Things will not function properly in this position, so we need to keep adjusting the locknut and the jaw case, a little at a time until your alignment is such that the notch is in the proper position and the other end is flush with the threads. This alignment still has a gap, so we'll loosen the locknut a little and twist the jaw case as well. Still a gap. Do the same thing again with the locknut and the jaw case until they are snug, and measure again. And now we are properly aligned, with the notch in place and the opposite end flush to the threads. Then you would use the wrenches and tighten the locknut and jaw case back together. However, while I have this exposed, I want to show you how the jaw case assembly and jaws come apart, because it is important to inspect and clean these areas as well when disassembled, and then properly reassemble them. So let's take a look. Now we are going to remove our jaw case assembly. You can leave the locknut and washer in place. We are simply going to remove this entire jaw case assembly by screwing it completely off. Keep the case level, and now you can get a good look at the threads, but leave the locknut and washer in place so that you don't lose your alignment when you reassemble. This is the jaw case assembly, and these jaws are normally held closed by spring tension. Here you can see the spring inside, and that spring is connected to a small plunger that presses up against the jaws. For now, I'm going to secure the jaws with my fingertip as I carefully dump out the spring and plunger assembly. Now you see that the jaws are still secured in the end by my finger. If I was to move my finger, they would fall right out. We'll get to that in a minute. This little plunger has a V shape to it. If I put my hand behind it and turn it a bit, you can see that it is wedged on both sides, forming a little V-shaped point. That point is what fits into the mating ends of the jaws. The plunger is removable. It has a short stem that fits into the spring. Let's set this down for a minute. And let's get back to our jaw case and the jaws. The jaws are still laying in the end, but if I turn this upside down, the jaws will fall out into my hand. The case is hollow and you can see right through it. Now, as you look closely at the inner sides of the jaws, you can see that they are serrated, or what looks like partial threads. Those serrated areas are what grip and hold the rivet mandrel. During operation, the jaws open a bit to receive the mandrel, and then close down on it. Pulling backward on the mandrel, which draws the mandrel bead into the rivet tube, thus installing the rivet. And the jaws pull and draw the mandrel with such force within the case that they snap off the mandrel, allowing it to fall into the tube. The jaws need to be cleaned every now and then, as little metal shavings will develop from the continuing friction between the jaws and the mandrel pins. The jaw case can also develop a buildup of shavings as well. So along with the shavings on the jaws, they may not move properly in the case. And then this area where the plunger spring rests can also get clogged up with shavings and inhibit proper spring compression. After cleaning, all of these areas need to be lubricated, but not the inner side of the jaws. Next, we're going to install the jaws. Installing them so that the smooth, curved sides are against the case wall, and the serrated insides are facing one another. So let's drop the first jaw inside. You can see that it is sticking out of the end now. Now let's take the other jaw and drop it in the same way. You may or may not get lucky the first time. It may take a couple of times to get them seated properly. You might have to shake them a little to get them into place. Next, insert the spring and plunger assembly. It will only sit against the jaws one way. You see how the spring is inside? If it was not seated properly, the spring would protrude beyond the jaw case threads. Next, as you reinstall the jaw case, be careful not to tip it too much or the parts will fall out. So keep the jaw case tilted up slightly and bring the gun to it, screwing the jaw case back onto the threads. Everything should still be positioned properly from when we aligned it earlier with the alignment tool. Just tighten the jaw case up to the locknut and washer. Only hand tighten it right now because you want to double check the alignment. As you can see, it's all aligned. This is touching here, and this notch hooks on properly. Perfect alignment. Now that you have verified proper alignment, you will tighten everything back up, utilizing the wrenches as before, getting them nice and tight, and confirming that the jaws are still properly seated. And don't forget that the nose piece is still tightened in all the way, so it will prevent the cover installation. The nose piece will be hitting the jaws, and the jaw case cover threads will not reach the other threads to grip. So you will have to loosen the nose piece a bit like before. Not all the way, but almost, down to the last couple of threads. Now it will allow you to slide the cover on far enough to actually allow the threads to grab. You can tighten down the nose piece first and then the cover after, or tighten down the cover first and then the nose piece. I like to tighten the cover first. Now that the cover is tightened down, you can tighten down the nose piece. Now your gun is properly reassembled. Everything is clean, lubricated, and back into operating positions.